will no longer be available in California at a time studies suggest the poundage of plastic bags thrown out is still going up per capita. Californians will still be able to get little plastic sacks to separate stuff like stinky fish. In Los Angeles, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Amelia Island presents the Amelia Island Cookout, October 17th to 20th at the Ritz-Carlton Amelia Island. A weekend of multi-course meals from master chefs, wine pairing dinners, an oceanfront cookout, and more. Info at AmeliaIslandCookout.com. Cuba Yoga Retreats offers multi-day yoga journeys in November and December, with boutique accommodations, farm-to-table meals, hikes to waterfalls, and a deep dive into Cuban culture. Only a few spots remain. More at CubaYogaRetreats.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, supporters say it will enshrine time-honored traditions into the state's constitution. Opponents worry it will herald a return to practices that are polluting and inhumane. Today we're talking to advocates on both sides of Amendment 2 about the right to hunt and fish. Then, a secret army that worked behind enemy lines to defeat Hitler is the scholarly focus of a newly minted Fulbright recipient from Jacksonville. And we talked to the organizer of a local workshop focused on overcoming election angst. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. The Israeli military says it's conducting fresh airstrikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah militants. The Israeli military has warned Lebanese civilians to leave any area where Hezbollah may be storing weapons. Israel and Hezbollah have launched hundreds of strikes across the border since a wave of Israeli attacks last week in Lebanon. Those included exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. As Israel launches more airstrikes in Lebanon, its war in Gaza continues. Gaza's health ministry says 3 Israeli attacks over the weekend killed more than 30 people sheltering in schools. NPR's Aya Batrawi reports Israel's military says it targeted Hamas militants with precise munitions operating from the schools.
An Israeli airstrike overnight targeted a room inside a school in central Gaza where a family was sleeping. The father, a suspected militant, was killed along with his wife and young daughter. Another child's in critical condition. NPR producer Anas Baba met the man's surviving teenage sons mourning their parents. The room was still splattered with bits of flesh and blood. Also this weekend, 2 schools in Gaza City were targeted by Israeli airstrikes. The Gaza Health Ministry says in one of those attacks, 22 people were killed, 12 of them children and 8 women. Aya Batrawi, NPR News.
The United Nations General Assembly opens its latest session this week in New York. Delegates are expected to focus closely on the Gaza war and the widening conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. NPR's Michelle Kellerman says that the UN representatives will also focus on other wars, including Ukraine.
The focus is really going to be on planning to help Ukraine get through another winter of war, how to protect critical infrastructure from Russian attacks. There's a meeting about that today. There's also a Security Council meeting this week, but very little gets done there. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is coming, and he's going to present what he's calling his plan for victory.
NPR's Michelle Kellerman reporting from New York. House Speaker Mike Johnson says congressional leaders have reached agreement on a short-term spending bill. It's designed to avert a partial shutdown of the federal government at the end of the month. NPR's Luke Garrett has more.
In a letter to House Republicans, Speaker Johnson outlined a bare-bones temporary funding package to keep the government open until December 20th. The agreement doesn't include the SAVE Act, the election security proposal backed by former President Donald Trump, a piece of legislation the Speaker was intent on passing. But with a few days left and an election looming, Johnson told his fellow Republicans shutting down the government days before the election would be, quote, an act of political malpractice. A source familiar with the talks said the new plan would also speed up existing funding totaling $232 million to the Secret Service. The measure is expected to get bipartisan support. Luke Garrett, NPR News, Washington.
It's NPR.
On WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Michelle Coram. New numbers from the state of Florida show the unemployment rate in the Jacksonville area is down slightly compared to last month, but higher than the year ago. Numbers released Friday by the Florida Department of Commerce show Jacksonville's unemployment rate ticked down to 3.7% in August, a tenth of a percent lower than July, yet 0.3% higher than in August of 2023. The statewide unemployment rate for August was 3.3%. The Jaguars are looking for their first win of the season tonight on the road against the Buffalo Bills. The Jags have had the Bills' number lately, winning 3 out of the last 4 matchups, including last year's game in London. That was 25-20. Head coach Doug Peterson says this week's matchup will be a great opportunity to play in a big game environment and get the team's first win.
Really a great atmosphere for football. It's a Monday night game. The fans are going to be, juiced up and ready to go, and it'll be good for us. I mean, it's a benchmark. It's a measuring stick game.
Tonight's game starts at 7:30 and will be broadcast nationally on ESPN. The temperature in Jacksonville now in the low 70s. It's 73 and clear here downtown. Sunshine today near 89 degrees. Low 70s tonight. Sunny on Tuesday. Looks like rain moves in for Wednesday, starting Wednesday.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a push to make traditional hunting and fishing a constitutional right. Our election coverage continues with a discussion of Amendment 2. We're hearing from advocates and opponents. Later in the program, a local event aims to ease election anxiety ahead of November 5th and beyond. But first, what exactly is traditional hunting and fishing? It's a question at the center of the debate over Amendment 2, which promises to preserve those rights. To talk about it, I'm joined by folks on both sides of the issue. James Scott, campaign coordinator for no2.org. Welcome, James.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're also joined by Erin Johnson. She's director of the North Florida Marine Association, a group that supports Amendment 2. Good morning, Erin. I can't hear you, Erin, but perhaps we'll get that fixed in just a second. Welcome. Erin, the right to hunt and fish is already a state statute since 2002. Why do you believe a constitutional amendment is needed? Nope. We're going to have to switch gears, Erin. I'm sorry. James, I'm going to start then by asking you about opposition to Amendment 2. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has said it supports Amendment 2. It doesn't appear to conflict with the goals of what that organization does in terms of regulating wildlife. Why does your group oppose Amendment 2?
Because it's not needed. The entire premise of Amendment 2 is that hunting and fishing are under attack, or could be. And that's just a false premise. And so if you agree with that Florida is never going to be attacking hunting and fishing, that's not where we're at, that's not where we're going to be, then you have to ask yourself, well, then why? And for starters, this amendment's not needed. It's already codified in state statute. Hunting and fishing are treasured pastimes, part of Florida's culture and heritage. And the FWC, for them to say, hey, nothing's going to change, everything will be just fine, then why do we need it? When this is a national agenda by big groups like the NRA and the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation to codify these things into law to make sure the hunting and fishing trump conservation measures and regulations and policies. So just because they say that this is not going to have a negative impact on conservation, we just saw what happened with state parks. Do we trust these people? Who do you trust? Do you trust the Humane Society and the Sierra Club and organizations that fight for the environment, or groups whose primary agenda is hunting and fishing?
I want to read the language of the amendment here before we get back to Erin, who I think is on the line with us. But the amendment says it would amend the state constitution to preserve forever fishing and hunting, including by the use of traditional methods, as a public right and preferred means of responsibly managing and controlling fish and wildlife. Erin, tell us why, first of all, you are in support of Amendment 2 and why you believe it's needed, despite the fact that there already is a statutory protection for hunting and fishing in Florida.
Well, I think just because we want to make sure that our rights aren't fully taken away as things go on. We are pro Amendment 2 because we want to make sure that we are still able in the future to do the things that, for instance, my husband and I enjoyed as we were growing up, like going out and fishing with our family and then giving my nieces and my children the opportunity to do the same.
What sort of threat do you envision? I mean, I think you probably just heard James saying that this is not a right that is under attack in Florida.
I would say that he might think that now, but something like this could definitely slowly make it more of a threat. I think that laws, when politics gets involved in the Americans' right to go out and do the things that they enjoy, such as fishing and hunting, I think once the government gets involved, it can be a little bit of a gray area as to what could potentially happen as laws continue to go forward and change.
So one of the provisions of this constitutional amendment, Erin, is traditional methods of hunting and fishing. How do you define traditional methods of hunting and fishing? I think there's been some concern that might open the door for some methods that are currently prohibited by the state, such as gill nets or leg traps.
I think traditional methods are just families going on their boat, going out and fishing for the entertainment of it. Number one, to spend time with your family, but also to provide for your family. My husband and I are traditional method fishermen. We go out, we use, rod and reel tackle. That to me would be considered traditional methods.
Do you have any concern that isn't more clearly defined in the language of the ballot amendment?
No, I don't believe so. I think traditional methods to me is pretty self-explanatory.
So, James, Erin says that this would be preemptive to prevent something that could impinge on people's right to hunt and fish. There has been, at least in the state of Oregon, there has been a proposal that would have restricted or outright, eliminated the ability to hunt. You don't believe that there is a threat that could be that could be similarly posed in Florida?
No way. Florida's part of the South. I grew up hunting and fishing. This is the premise that hunting and fishing could be under attack in Florida is just not true. And the Oregon example, first off, that was a measure to more tightly regulate. Yes, it would have highly regulated hunting and fishing and outlawed a lot of inhumane practices. It would have been a bridge too far for a lot of us, but that measure miserably failed. They didn't even get it on the ballot. And so that's the best example they can point to in a far-flung part of the continent that failed. So the premise that this right and this valued cultural pastime of Floridians would somehow get thrown under the bus and attacked in the years ahead. We need a darn good reason to change our Constitution, and some half-cooked premise about what could happen that's highly unfeasible is not a good enough, that we have not met a high enough bar to change our Constitution.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about Amendment 2, the right to hunt and fish. How do you plan to vote? What questions do you have about the amendment? You can join us on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Erin, there is a provision in this amendment that says that hunting and fishing, traditional hunting and fishing, would be, quote, the preferred means of managing wildlife. What does that mean to you and to other supporters in your group that are backing Amendment 2 in terms of having it be the preferred means?
I think that traditional hunting and fishing is the best way to manage populations. And I can only really speak towards the marine side of it. And I think a good example of that is what has happened to the red snapper in the state of Florida. We are now very limited on how we can, and when we can go out and catch red snapper in our offshore areas. And because of all of the regulations that were put forth in that, we're seeing a very high overpopulation of them, to where sometimes that's all you can catch, and then we can't keep them. We have to throw them back. So I think once you get laws and regulations in place, it really doesn't do well for how to properly, conserve and manage populations of different types of species.
I think, Erin, just to kind of flesh that out a little bit, one of the concerns for people who read that language, that it would be the preferred means of managing wildlife, is that it might preempt other science-based efforts that could be maybe more time-consuming or possibly costlier, but also they might argue more humane than hunting or fishing. So I would just ask you what your thoughts are about that particular concern.
Well, again, I can only speak on fishing. I can't really speak on the hunting side of that, but I don't see anything inhumane about going out and catching fish in traditional methods.
We've got a call from Douglas downtown. Good morning, Douglas. Go ahead.
Good morning. I recall a couple of years back there was a moratorium on catching red snapper because the population of that fish had dropped so low and it was, a concern. How would this amendment impact things like moratoriums to try and rebuild the population of various species?
I'll ask you that, James. What's your answer to that?
I mean, that's why this amendment is a Trojan horse, is that we really don't know. Is the FWC going to err and say, you know what, this goes outside the bounds of our authority because this amendment in the Constitution says so? Or is somebody going to sue and say, hey, the FWC is telling me when and how much and where I can catch these fish? And so it's up to ultimately what's going to happen is that a lot of this amendment and how it affects the bears and the snapper and the snook and the redfish, it's going to come down to the courts. It's going to be litigated. And so we don't know the answer to that, but this is designed to constrain the power of the state to manage fish and wildlife, not to expand it, not to make it better, not to make it more effective. So all the regulations that we have today and the ones that we're going to want to build in the future, the red snapper is a great example. We only have those fish in abundance today because the state used its authority to rebound that species. Same for the black bear, even same for the alligator. And yes, in some cases, the populations over rebound, and we have to rein that in. But the ability to take a population that's in peril and to bring that back, that authority of the state to do that will all be subject to legal challenge if this passes.
We've got a call from Tom near NAS Jacks. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning. I think this whole Amendment 2 idea, yes or no to hunting and fishing, is just a red herring. I think it's just a chess move. People who are more prone to say yes to protect a woman's rights on Amendment 4, or people who are going to say yes to allow the legalization of marijuana, are probably going to say no, hunting and fishing is wrong. So this gives the state legislature a chance to say, wait a minute, we can't have this to people up in armed and rebellion, and oh no, we've got to nullify everything down the line and kick it down to the next vote. I think this is just a chess move. They're hoping to be able to have an excuse to nullify the people's wishes on all the amendments by throwing in something that they know is going to be unpopular.
Thanks, Tom. We've also got a call from Nilly on the west side. Good morning, Nilly. Go ahead. You there? Go ahead. Good morning, Nilly. Go ahead. Oh, maybe we'll have to take you in a second. Sorry. So, Erin, the Florida Bar has issued an analysis of this amendment and generally oppose this amendment. I think one of their concerns is that it would invite litigation down the road, that because there are some terms that aren't specifically well defined, that it could lead to expensive taxpayer funded, court battles. What have you heard about that concern? What would you say to that concern?
I would say that anything these day and age could bring litigation, into the mix. And I think that I'm going to stick to my stance on this. That when you're threatening the American right and threatening something that is such an economic impact to our state and to our country, that I would say we're going to fight for it. We're going to do everything we can to keep our rights. And if it causes litigation, it causes litigation. But I think it's something that's worth the cause.
It's interesting. We talk about the economic impact, and we can talk about some of those numbers, Erin. But there was a Miami Herald op-ed, I think just yesterday, opposing Amendment 2, and it noted, boating and golfing are also part of Florida's culture and history, and their impact dwarfs that of hunting and fishing. But there's no, effort to enshrine those as rights, fundamental rights in the Constitution.
Well, for golfing, is that what you said? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think their comparison was for golfing and boating, that, those are also very traditional Florida activities.
Well, boating and fishing go hand in hand, and as the administrative director of the North Florida Marine Association, that's what we do. Our association's mission is to protect boating, the right to boat, safe boating, and fishing goes hand in hand with that. 1.3 billion fishing licenses were purchased in 2022 in the state of Florida, and so the economic impact is huge. If there are laws in place that start saying that, and I'm not saying it's happening now, but this is to where it's going to be a forever opportunity for us to do that. And when you start putting any type of laws, they slowly start getting a little bit more meticulous and more meticulous. And I think that could be a huge threat to the economic impact that boating and fishing has in the state of Florida. I mean, we're talking jobs, we're talking livelihood and support of families, and just people's rights in general to go out and enjoy the beautiful waters that we have here, especially in North Florida. I personally believe that North Florida has the best fishery in the state of Florida. And this is very concerning to me that people are not wanting to pass this amendment, so that there is an opportunity sometime down the line to where that could be completely taken away.
We've got a call from Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to know, what are the traditional methods of hunting and fishing, specifically, besides families on boats with their fishing rods? Does it include trapping, overfishing? What exactly does that definition mean? Thank you.
Thanks. I believe that's, one of the question, James, that has been at the source of some of the opposition to this. What's your thoughts about that?
I mean, so this amendment is boilerplate language pushed across the country by the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and the National Rifle Association. And in the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation's own literature, it says that if you're trying to push an amendment like this in a state, use the phrase traditional methods, because words like trapping, that the average voter finds trapping to be inhumane. So to get around the inhumane aspect of certain methods of hunting specifically and fishing, the traditional methods is code for the kind of, because think back, generations ago, strangling neck snares, body crushing steel traps, poisons, gill nets, clubbing, hunting bears with packs of dogs. These are all traditional methods, and we have outlawed most of those. So that is the vagueness of this amendment is why it is so dangerous. It's designed to appeal to the average voter to say, yeah, traditional methods, that must be good. Traditional is great. America, apple pie. That is not what it means. It's code. And again, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to interpretation. What's the FWC going to think, and what are the courts going to think? And we have no idea, but we know the state of Florida. We know what they did with state parks. We know what they've done with the restoration of felons' voting rights, we do not want to put the power to interpret this in the hands of the people who have the power to interpret it.
Well, James, I want to just push back on that a little bit because FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, has said that the threat of gill nets or spear fishing or leg hold traps that is not an issue. That the language proposed in the Amendment 2, they've said, does not change or alter the existing net ban. It doesn't undo regulations or reset FWC's regulatory authority. And he also points out that, the net ban is actually protected also by the Constitution. It was approved by voters in 1994. So why are you saying that you think something like a net ban could be undone by this if FWC says no and voters have already voted that into the Constitution?
So two things. Number one, we don't trust them. Number two, in 2007, the Wakulla County Fishermen's Association challenged the gill net ban. They had it overturned in the county court, and they lost on the appellate level because there was not a fundamental right in the Constitution to defend their case. So the gill net ban already was almost thrown out by the courts. And now that this is going to be put back, if this were to be put in the Constitution, you think that those same associations are not going to go back to the courts and say, hey, we have a fundamental right now. Remember back in 2007, what happened with Wakulla County? Yeah, we want to throw this gill net ban out. So for them to say, hey, everything's going to be just fine, we're not going to turn over the apple cart, we don't trust them.
All right. We've got a call from Mike in Piccolata. Good morning, Mike. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? This discussion about the red snapper is not even appropriate because the ban on red snapper fishing, or the one limit per person for one day, is a federal requirement. That's not going to change with this law. It's not going to have anything to do with it. The feds are the ones that have restricted red snapper fishing. And I agree. If we make traditional fishing methods appropriate, then I can guarantee you that the commercial fishermen will be out there with any way they think they can traditionally catch more fish at the expense of the recreational fishermen. So I'm against it.
Thanks, Mike. I do believe now have Nilly on the west side. Good morning, Nilly. Go ahead.
Hi. Earlier you mentioned that there are more scientific ways of controlling the fishing population that are more humane. I was just wondering, what are those methods, and how are they effective in controlling the population?
That's a good question, Nilly. And what I've seen, and James, I'll let you chime in too, but I believe that, for instance, when it comes to the Florida black bear, there are concerns that this amendment might open the door for more killing of black bear via hunting. And one of the methods that others have recommended in terms of controlling the population that's been effective is something like bear-proof garbage cans. But I'm not sure in terms of fishing, James, your thoughts on that, and then I'll ask Erin the same question.
I'll say this amendment is mostly about hunting, for starters. The fishing aspect, the real threat to our waters are foreign trawler fleets and gill nets. Gill nets are remarkably inhumane. They kill sea turtles, dolphins, even whales. They catch and kill everything that touch them. That is from my perspective, that's the greatest threat. And again, when folks say that gill nets are definitely not going to go back into Florida waters, look at Wakulla County in 2007.
Erin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, I have to agree with him. Gill net and all that is definitely a little bit inhumane, but he's right. This is more about hunting, and I think that people do not, when they're interpreting the methods as far as hunting, it's going to be much different from fishing. And again, I'm just going to reiterate that traditional methods to me are spear fishing, rod and reel fishing, and all of that. And I'd like to also touch on the gentleman that called in about the red snapper. I realize that the red snapper is regulated federally and not locally by state. It was just an example of what could happen once the government and politics get involved with the laws when it comes to fishing and hunting.
James, I want to ask you about the economic impact argument, because the supporters of Amendment 2 have noted that fishing brings nearly $14 billion into the state each year, about 120,000 jobs, and hunting brings in another $2 billion, or about 14,000 jobs. There certainly is a economic argument in terms of preserving the right to hunt and fish?
I mean, again, to go back to the main premise here, the why do we need this? The why is a lie. There is no threat to it. Floridians love hunting and fishing. We love the economic impact that it brings. Nobody is going after hunting and fishing, especially because it's got an alignment of outdoorsmen and anglers and tourism agencies and local governments. There is a broad consensus in the state of Florida that hunting and fishing are part of our culture and good for our economy. And so, yeah, these are, again, if there was a modicum of threat to hunting and fishing, I would even be open to the idea that we needed to protect them. And at a higher level, I would also have way better language so it's not so vague, so some judge somewhere can't make up whatever interpretation they want to make up. But again, the premise that it's under attack and that the economic impact is under attack is just false.
We have an email from Hannah. She said, so exhausted by these specious conservative talking points and Chicken Little, the sky is falling down arguments to protect rights. This is clearly a Trojan horse for the NRA. Erin, I want to ask you about, the placement of, this is not a citizens initiative, unlike the recreational marijuana or the abortion amendment. This is placed on the ballot by lawmakers, and it is language that is similar to, I think, 23 other states have adopted. It is supported by the NRA. It is supported by the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Does it matter to you that it's not a grassroots initiative, so to speak, but more of one that's coming as part of a national push?
No, and the reason why is because they're the politicians. They're doing what we've voted them into office to do, and that's to protect our rights. And he's saying, the gentleman that's on with me is saying, that the concern, about all this is a lie. But I would venture to say that it could be a lie of what the intention is when you're trying to oppose it. So when things start becoming a threat, we're going to do what we need to do to make sure that we're able to go out and enjoy our freedoms. People come to the state of Florida to fish. It is a huge economic impact. When you start putting politics and laws into place, you're going to start really having things be a detriment to that, to that freedom to do that.
James, I want to ask you just briefly about a controversy that's emerged around the support from a financial aspect of Amendment 2. There's been some reporting showing that the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, which is the recipient of the bear license plate funding, if people are familiar with that, it says Protect Florida Wildlife, and it has a picture of a black bear, but actually that foundation has been donating, I think, $250,000 or so to support Amendment 2. And some people who have that plate have been disappointed, I guess, would be a way to put it, that money that they put towards the plates could actually, in their mind, imperil the black bear.
Yeah, and that speaks to the fact that a lot of supposedly pro-environment groups in this state are compromised, whether it's because who their money comes from or where their connections are. The fact that foundation, who takes its monies from our plates, when Floridians get the license plate with the bear on it, they think that they're protecting those bears. And the irony that money, $250,000 from that organization, would go toward the Yes on 2 campaign to lobby for Floridians to put an amendment in the Constitution that will be used to open up bear hunting again. Mark my words. If Amendment 2 passes, that's what's going to happen. It is it's shameful, it's dishonest, and it speaks to the kind of people in power that we're fighting against, the kind of people that put this on the ballot in the first place. A lot of good people support Amendment 2. I get those people. I come from those people. But I also know Florida politics and Florida politicians, and many of them are not to be trusted.
Erin, I'm going to give you the last word. For people who are questioning Amendment 2 and their support for it, what would you suggest they do?
I would suggest that you do your research. I would suggest that you make sure you're reading the language. The analysis, the staff analysis just came out. Read that thoroughly. FWC, again, none of the things that are in place with FWC and their authorities are going to go anywhere. I believe that the FWC still will keep an eye on and manage populations and whatnot. But I would just say be very careful if you're voting no on Amendment 2, because this is just the start of something that could be detrimental in the future.
Erin Johnson, James Scott, thank you both so much for coming on the program today and talking about Amendment 2. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a Fulbright scholar studies gender dynamic. Passion for history and theater is adding a prestigious Fulbright scholarship to her long list of academic accomplishments. To tell us what's next, we're joined by Danielle Wiransky. She's a Ph.D. candidate at Florida State University. Good morning, Danielle.
Good morning.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, just being here has been a little bit of a long journey. We were going to have you on earlier. You were just in Austria. You were impacted by some of the catastrophic flooding that has been in Europe and Eastern Europe. Just tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Austria and then Linz for a conference, and we ended up being trapped in Linz and unable to get back to Vienna to fly back to the United States because the flooding was so severe. All the highways to Vienna were shut down, the trains were canceled. Vienna itself was underwater, half the city lost power. The subways in the city didn't work, so it was a struggle getting back for sure.
Is that anything like you've experienced in Florida, or is that sort of the first experience with that sort of catastrophic level of flooding?
I think it was my first real experience. I maybe just because in Florida, like it rains all the time and we have bad weather, and so when bad weather events happen, we're just like kind of trucking through it, anyways. But in Europe, they were very concerned about safety, and I've never experienced like highways being shut down. And because public transport is really the main way to get around, when they put those regulations in place, it was really impossible to get around. Whereas here, if I need to go somewhere, even in a disaster, you're going to drive yourself over.
Right,
So,
right. A little different in Florida. All right. So your roots in Jacksonville run deep. You went to school in Mandarin, and then you graduated from Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. You were a theater and creative writing dual major there, and then you've gone on to a career that includes creative writing, theater, history, gender studies. I'm not even really sure where to start. Your CV is 6 pages long and very intimidating. I think it gives everybody else like a fraud syndrome. But at any rate, let's start with the Fulbright Award that you were just given. For people who aren't familiar, what is that? What does that allow for?
so the Fulbright is probably one of the most famous awards or scholarships that you can get. And it's an international program where the United States partners with pretty much every country and creates a sort of exchange. There are a lot of variations on the Fulbright. Some people go to teach, some people go to do research, some go to get a graduate degree. The Fulbright that I won specifically is for research and is for PhD students to be able to go to another country and do research for their dissertation.
And your research is a really interesting combination of your passion for history, your knowledge about Jewish culture. You're fluent in Hebrew. I've taught it before, but also women's studies. And it kind of combines a lot of those. Tell us what it is specifically that you're working on for your dissertation.
Sure. So my dissertation is going to be a gender analysis where I'm looking at common experiences of intelligence agents for the Special Operations Executive, which was a British intelligence organization that only existed during World War II. And they were the agency that used women agents the most in an official capacity. So I'm looking at the average experience of spies for that agency, but specifically the F section, which is what they called France. And looking, when I break down the common experience, so recruitment, training, being out in the field, how did agents' experience differ by gender?
And these are women that were working behind enemy lines, working in France, for instance, to
Yes.
provide intelligence against the Axis.
Yes, absolutely. But what's also interesting is that the Special Operations Executive was focused on sabotage. So these women were not just gathering intelligence, but helping to put in place sabotage acts that were supposed to cripple the Axis powers there as well.
And so you're going to be doing this research in Jerusalem. So what is the connection there in terms of, do they have a repository of this information? Why are you going there?
So I'm going so that I can work in Yad Vashem, which is the world's leading Holocaust museum and archive. And on the surface, my dissertation seems like it has more of a World War II focus, but there's actually a large Holocaust element in history to it as well. Because when I look at a common experience of the agents, which was capture, torture, execution, the majority of that happened in concentration camps. And so I'm really focusing on the later half of my dissertation on those experiences and trying to get a better sense of what their experiences in the concentration camps were like.
And are these people that you're going to be profiling as individuals, or are you looking more at like a collective experience that they had as spies?
I have to break it down into individual experiences to some degree just because it's not a huge pool of people. But I'm trying to collectivize the experience as much as I can while still recognizing and identifying that there are always outliers to
And
those experiences.
what do you hope becomes of your research? Like, how might it further the conversation around gender studies or World War II or anything else?
I think, especially coming off of the conference I just went to, which was about women in the Holocaust, I think that the experience of women in the Holocaust is really understudied. There's always a focus on like the Jewish experience or certain groups of people, and it makes sense racially. That's what the Holocaust was about. Why to focus that way? And so I think that focusing on the Holocaust in regards to gender is still something that needs to be explored. And the same thing when we look at intelligence history or military history, there is not very much of a focus or a highlight on the women that were involved in this work. And I think that by bringing this to light, I'm really amplifying the contributions that these women made and finding new things we can draw from to learn about gender studies from the past that can apply to today.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Danielle Wiransky. She is a graduate of Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, but she has gone on to get her undergrad and master's at FSU, and she's currently working on her dissertation. And if you want to join our conversation, you're welcome to. You can reach us at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So a big part of your work when you were living in Jacksonville was in the theater, and you performed, you wrote plays, and you continued to. You created a theater company.
Yes, I'm the founder of White Mouse Productions, it's just starting its 9th season at Florida State University.
And that company has also had productions outside of Florida. Is that right?
Yes, we've performed in Greensboro, and this summer we actually had a performance off Broadway in New York City.
So tell us what the production there was of.
Yeah, so that was a new musical called The Secrets We Keep, and I was the book writer and the lyricist for this production, and I was really honored to also be able to direct it myself. And it was an exploration of the Holocaust, looking it was an exploration of the Holocaust through folklore. So if you're not familiar with the Rusalki, those are a Slavic mythological creature that's really similar to like the siren, and it's the spirit of women who have been drowned. And I was looking at it through a Holocaust lens by exploring victims of the Holocaust, women who were drowned, and how they became Rusalki, and how being trapped in this state and with this mythology affects our understanding of the Holocaust today.
It must have been extraordinarily exciting to be making an off-Broadway production like that.
It was a once in a lifetime experience. I'm incredibly grateful for it. Originally, we just intended to go to New York. My composing partner, Frank Sanchez, lived in New York, and he was the one that suggested after a performance in Tallahassee, we bring it up to him in New York. And as we were doing research and finding opportunities, we were able to move off Broadway to an off Broadway venue, though we did have some anti Semitism and hiccups that affected our performance. We almost didn't get to perform because the original theater we were slated to perform at shut us down because they said that they didn't feel comfortable having Jewish stories or Holocaust stories on their stage because of the current political climate. And they canceled us a week before we were supposed to travel up.
Wow.
So we were really fortunate to find another off-Broadway venue that miraculously happened to be available. And with the help of the Dramatist Legal Defense Fund, we were able to move venues. And I think it was probably an even better experience because of it at this new venue.
I want to ask you, just in terms of where you're going to be doing your studies, obviously there's a lot of turmoil in the Middle East right now. Do you have any safety concerns about studying abroad in Jerusalem?
I think I do have some safety concerns, but I do know that there are always safety precautions put in place for the citizens of Israel, and I have a lot of family there too. So I feel confident in knowing that I'll be in good hands, and I know my university has my back too, should anything arise.
So your musical, and in researching and writing that, how does that inform the work that you do as a historian and the research that you do?
I think it's almost the opposite, where the writing and research I do informs where I go with my PhD, because I'll find some moment, a person, a place, an event in history that I'm really drawn to and I want to write about it. And so I end up doing research too. So whatever I want to write my plays or musical about is almost an excuse to do my historical research and writing as well. So many birds, one stone. And why not? If I can write a play and a musical and a dissertation all on the same topic, why not?
How did you come to it in the first place? I mean, when did you first discover your love of theater?
I have so growing up in Jacksonville, I went to all of the schools of the arts, starting with Pine Forest. So I started majoring in theater in the fourth grade, and theater has always been my great love, and that really transitioned into a love of playwriting, especially in high school at Douglas Anderson. And when I went to FSU, that's why I did a degree in theater and a second degree in creative writing, because that was sort of my marriage of the two fields to be able to major in playwriting, essentially. And I had always been interested in World War II and the Holocaust because of my identity and family background, and my grandfather was a World War II veteran, as well as anti-Semitism that I experienced growing up in the South. That really made me have to step up and take the lead in educating my peers about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And I found that I was just writing about World War II and the Holocaust all the time. And my undergraduate thesis was actually a musical geared towards Holocaust education. And it was really well received, but audiences were like, "Oh, but you're just a theater major. So what do you actually like know about this? Like, how can you teach us about the Holocaust when this is your background? You're not an educator or a scholar or an academic." And so that's when I decided to switch tracks and get my master's in history so I could really be a master in the history that I was trying to talk about.
And yet those are heavy subjects to put on the stage, especially in like a musical theater setting. So how do you balance the intensity of the subject matter with just the demands of entertainment in the theater?
I think when people hear musicals and Holocaust, they are a little bit jarred and maybe think more like Springtime for Hitler kind of vibes. And
Like the
that's
producers, right?
yeah, and that's definitely not what I do. The way that I think about musicals is the reason the characters sing is because there's so much intensity and emotion that words aren't enough to speak. They have to sing. And I think the Holocaust and the intensity and the high emotion of those events really lends itself to musicals. And that one of the greatest things that we can learn from the Holocaust, not just like dates and facts, are or is empathy. And I think that theater and music is one of the greatest ways to reach people and to teach empathy as well. So I think that also that marriage of Holocaust and musicals really brings that together for audiences and helps affect and reach them in a different way.
And so for the production that made it, it was in Tallahassee, it was in New York. Are you writing the music or are you writing lyrics and someone else? How does that work?
Yeah, so usually I come up with an idea and I write the book, the script of the musical, and I work with a composing partner. And for The Secrets We Keep, I worked with three different composers, Frank Sanchez, Shannon Wolf, and Jane Achenbach. And I also served as the lyricist. And so usually I write the lyrics first and then they write the music to match it. And we have really deep discussions about the emotional intensity and what we're trying to evoke and share with this music too. And we really collaborate on that process.
So when do you actually travel and when do your studies begin officially? How long are you going to be there?
I'm going to be in Israel for 4 months and I leave on October 18th, so less than a month away.
Well, it's a delight to meet you. Thanks so much for coming on the program today. And
The unseeable by using advanced imaging technology to improve accuracy in diagnoses and treatments. More at mayoclinic.org/Florida.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
AI-generated social media posts and comments, sham news websites with names like DC Weekly, The Boston Times, and Election Watch. Russia's attempts to influence American voters' perceptions and beliefs in this year's elections are getting more sophisticated. They're even using U.S. media personalities to sow division among voters. How to protect election integrity? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Julia Simon, and I'm NPR's Climate Solutions reporter. A key climate solution is something that reduces planet heating pollution, like using solar and wind energy. But there's so much else we can do. Adapting to our changing climate, holding companies accountable, those can also be climate solutions. Invest in solutions-focused coverage today with a donation to this station. And thank you.
Please call 353-9528 or visit us at wjct.org/radio.
You get endless emails and texts from political campaigns. Sometimes they even ask you to donate to their cause. But where are those funds going? From individuals to billionaires to super PACs, we take a look at donor dollars and where they go. How political money is spent next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. It's a political event, but it's one aimed at fostering calm and thoughtful dialogue despite these politically divisive times. Joining me to talk about the Hang and Heal event is life coach Adriana Sequel. Welcome, Adriana.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So where did the idea for this event come from? It's not the first time you've done a Heal and Hang.
No, it's not. I am the creator and facilitator of Heal and Hang, and what Heal and Hang is my very unique way of life coaching. I developed Heal and Hang after our COVID era as a way to get back to connecting with other people. I felt that after an era of isolation, it would be a really great idea for us to not only reconvene socially, but also be able to just kind of talk about everything that we'd gone through and the effects that it had on us. And from there, Heal and Hang kind of grew legs and took on a life of its own. And we're up in the teens now as far as workshops that we've done, and Heal and Hang Saving Ourselves is the next one that I think is going to be the most beneficial to the community.
And so how do you guide those discussions? Like as a life coach, what sort of skills do you bring to that so that people are having a fruitful conversation?
Yeah, so with Heal and Hang, facilitating those, even though it's put on by me, it's really a community-led event. So for example, for Heal and Hang Saving Ourselves, we do have this theme of addressing political anxiety for the local election and especially the national election. But we want to make sure that we're, dispelling misinformation and disinformation, especially for communities of color. So with this particular discussion, even though it'll be led by myself and we're collaborating with Mr. Alpete of the MPN Management, MPN Network.
And also of Mr. Alpete's Neighborhood on WJCT every Saturday night.
Absolutely. A little promo there. We're collaborating, but we are also reaching out to the community to make sure that they're heard. So one of the special ways that we're facilitating this event is when you register through Eventbrite, you're actually able to go ahead and submit your questions beforehand through our Google Forms. So that way we can kind of tackle what's most important on folks' minds.
So you talk about addressing election anxiety. What kind of anxiety are you hearing about in the community ahead of November 5?
Right. So we've had quite a few shakeups with the national election, and even though things seem to be running a little bit more smoothly now, I understand that there is a lot of anxiety about what's to come. Who's going to be sitting in that elected seat, and especially when it comes to communities of color, marginalized communities, there is quite a lot at stake. And that's something that needs to be addressed. But also, ahead of addressing that, we need to know what's true and what's not. So that way we can make the most informed decisions for ourselves when it comes to the polls.
And so this will be a discussion. There's kind of a journaling component to it and also a voter registration opportunity.
Yes. So, what we will be doing is we will be discussing the candidates, the issues, whether they be national or local. And also, again, the journaling component of it goes towards the anxieties that we're having. We do want to get the information out there, but we also want to add that feeling and emotional and mental component to this. So, aside from this being CNN, which is something that we don't necessarily want. We definitely want our guests to be able to express what they're feeling right now, what they're anxious about, what they're afraid of, and be able to express that in community. I do believe that community is one of the most precious resources that we have. And that's why I want this to be a community led event. So, yes, there will be that journaling component. We'll be sharing some information, and also guests will be able to either register to vote while they're there or make sure that their information is up to date for their voter registration cards.
And are you expecting or inviting people with differing political views? I know that there was, some words on the
Mhm.
flyer that says, this is not a place for debate. This is not a place for disrespect.
Right. So, yes, differing political views are allowed. Especially one of the things that I personally would like to say in communities of color, we are not a monolith. We are not all the same. There are different political views, but one of the things that is most important to me about this event is that we are respectful to each other. So, that means, no homophobia, no transphobia, no racism, anything like that. That's not allowed. But we do want to make sure that we are covering all sides and making sure that everyone is indeed informed. And again, the goal is to make the best decisions, not just for ourselves, but for our community at large.
So the event, it's called Heal and Hang. It's Saturday, September 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Cafe Resistance Bookstore and Coffee
Yes.
Shop on Soutel. Adriana Sequel, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our program. Thanks for listening. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You could send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive at WJCT.org or on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when we look at what happens when medical science gets it wrong, from opioid addiction to peanut allergies. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The 2024 Scottish Highland Games Masters World Championship, October 5th and 6th at the Clay County Fairgrounds. International athletic competition and a festival featuring pipes and drums, Celtic music, and Scottish clans. Tickets available at 2024mwc.com. WinGuard, a marketing and communications agency designing websites from concept to clicks, is dedicated to helping businesses and nonprofits tell their story, capture the right audience, and deliver results. More at wearewinguard.com.